It's a day after Christmas, and I thought we would reflect on the last couple of years and compare the starts of the season to those of the last two title teams as we gear up for more conference play. Guess what? You're locked on.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available via podcast and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we dive into today's show, just want to say a huge thank you to all our followers and those that have made this show grow incredibly fast. And we're not just talking hyperbole, everybody. This podcast, when we recorded this as of December 23rd, is the number one ranked college basketball show on the Locked On Podcast Network, according to Apple's Top 100 rankings. And it's because of fans like you who value great UConn content. We're proud to say we're the only daily show that covers both the men's and women's basketball programs, the absolute hoops capital of the world. And we're thrilled to bring you the coverage you deserve. To show our gratitude, we're giving back. We're donating 10% of our revenue to Husky Ticket Project, Andrew Hurley's favorite fundraiser, helping in charity, helping send kids to UConn games and making monthly donations to Bleeding Blue for Good, supporting NIL initiatives that we think make a difference. So if you're enjoying the show, take a moment to subscribe, follow, and leave a review wherever you listen. Thanks again for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. All right, we bring to the program my co-host and fellow UConn aficionado of Exit 68, Dan Meehan. Dan, hope you had a great Christmas. My thought is, and actually you came to me with this. Let's look at the last 2 years of what this team has done and not necessarily compare it to the other two, but show the audience and tell the audience where everything stands currently and where it was the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's a good practice to just kind of see where you're at. We've got a little bit of a lull in the schedule before the next game. This is going to be the most days off that this team has in between games the rest of the way. Yep. We're just going to take a 30,000-foot view, high-level view, and see where this team stacks up compared to the last 2 years' teams. So going back to 22-23, Andre Jackson year, Sonogo, Hawkins, Tristan Newton, that team wins it all. They start the season hair on fire, 13-0. They score 90 points twice. They only played one top 25 team in those first 13 games in Alabama. They won that game. Then they lose 8 of their next 20 in conference before the national tournament. We're all going crazy. The world is ending. They go from as high as number 2 in the AP poll on December 26th and ultimately drop to 24 1 month later at the end of January. That January has been talked about.
Oh my God! Right.
The world.
We didn't know each other then because I wasn't doing the podcast then. What were your thoughts? Like when be honest, because I'll tell you what I thought but I want to hear yours first. Like when they were in that 6 of 8 game slot, we didn't talk because we didn't know each other. Who are you talking to at that time and being like, what the hell is going on?
It was a singular day and moment in time that I will never forget. I was driving home from showing a home at 9:00 in the morning. Showing didn't go well. UConn had just lost the game to Seton Hall, and I had a mental breakdown in the driver's seat of my car, texting friends saying, this team stinks. We're never going to win another national championship. The world was ending. They were absolutely reeling. I think they lost 7 games in January. So similar to this year's Maui Invitational that was just we want to put in the rear view, never talk about again. Dan Hurley has made similar comments about that January. We don't talk about that anymore. Shooting splits for that team, 22-23. This was, of the last 3 years, by far and away the most not inefficient, but this team only shot 46% on the year. The last 2 seasons, last year's team and this year were neck and neck at 50%. That is a significant margin. That 22-23 team had guys like Andre Jackson who were awesome players, but didn't necessarily stroke it as well from 3 or elsewhere on the court as this year's team and last year's. 22-23 team shot 36% from 3. That's in line with this year's team, 76% from free throw line. So that team ends up, just having an incredible run in the national tournament. But that season, it was up and down. It started hot. They reel in January, and then they get it together at the right time. And the story with so many of the UConn championship squads, we've had 6 in the last 30 years. Some have been dominant all season long, like the 1999 and 2004 teams. And then we've had other years like 2011, 2014, where it was just a miracle run and this team gets hot at the right time. That was kind of the story of that 22-23 team towards the end. So looking back to last year, they start the season 11-2, scored 90 points 4 times, went 3-1 versus top 25 teams. They beat Texas, UNC, and Gonzaga. They lose to Kansas at Fall Allen. Finished the regular season going 20-1 before the national tournament. Break sorts of records with regard to the Big East record, the most wins of all time in the Big East. Essentially, modern day in the last 20 years, that's one of the greatest teams that we're ever going to see again. Shooting splits, super efficient, 49.7% field goal percentage, 36% from 3, and 74 free throw percentage. The rest is history with that squad. We lose 4 guys to the NBA, come into this season, some new personnel. UConn has an absolute disaster of a Maui Invitational, losing 3 straight in 3 days. They rebound to go 10-3. This team has scored 90 points in 6 of their 13 games. Shooting is super efficient, 49% from the field, 36 from 3, and getting better daily. And this is the best free throw shooting team of the last 3 years. They're shooting 79%. Samson Johnson was shooting 48% from the free throw line last year. He's over 70% now. So this team is getting better. They're as it stands right now going forward, they've only got 1 team in the AP top 25 the rest of the way. So I think St. John's will squeak in at some point, but that's kind of what we're looking forward to in Big East play. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, before we get to the next segment, I was kind of similar to you when 2023, I messaged my dad and was just basically just said, I don't know if this team has it. That was and it was the same game. It was a Seton Hall game. And I think it was probably, if I was locked in as much as I am now with the show, I probably wouldn't have had that same sentiment, because what I will tell you about doing the show is offered me is a little bit more perspective on each game. And so that in particular, I think Dan was out with COVID that game. And so they were without their leader on the road in a Big East environment that's very difficult to play. If they lose to Seton Hall this year, I may lose that perspective again, because we're going to get into where everyone's ranked here in a second. But yeah, I think that's almost everyone's seminal moment that year. And then last year, because I remember texting my dad two separate times, this team is special. Once in 22-23 when they're on that 14, they actually started the year 14-0, that this 13-0 stretch. And then last year, even after the Kansas loss, I said, Dad, this team is special because no one comes back against Kansas there. North Carolina did that again this year, so maybe that's not the best thing to say, but that Kansas team was good last year, especially beginning of the year. And they shot something like 60% that day, and we still were right there with a hobbled Cam Spencer, no Steph Castle. Donovan was kind of coming off an injury. So I was like, yeah, we're good. We're fine. That was the moment where I was just like, this team is, to Dan's point, bulletproof. I felt really comfortable after that Kansas loss. So, yeah, man, I think these two teams, I think that the team he has now is nothing like these other teams. And it's all going to be about micro contributions as the time goes on. Do you agree with that?
There's nothing wrong with this personnel being different. They've just got to figure it out. You got, 18 games to go in the regular season of the Big East Conference. I think they like their personnel. They've had a couple injuries.
They love it.
Yeah, they've had a couple injuries, and Mondoel's been out the last 3 games. But they have absolutely found something. We talked about it numerous times on this podcast about trying to recreate Donovan Clingan through the aggregate with Samson Johnson and Terrace Reed. We did a thread on Twitter. Go check it out. These guys have more than shown up as a tandem. And I think they really like what they're getting. That was the one question mark coming into the season. And I think it's flipped. I think
it's not that.
They're trying to find contributions elsewhere. Those guys have held it down more than anyone on the team.
For sure. We'll touch on that real quick after the break, and then get into the NET and the KenPom rankings coming up after this. Have you ever looked at your bank statement and found charges for subscriptions you forgot or didn't even realize you had? I know I have. And that's where Rocket Money came to the rescue. It's like having your own personal finance assistant. Rocket Money found these sneaky subscriptions and canceled them for me in just a few taps. Rocket Money isn't just about canceling subscriptions. It's a personal finance app that helps you take control of your money. Whether it's finding and canceling unwanted subscriptions, monitoring your spending, or even lowering your bills, Rocket Money brings everything together in one great place. With over 5 million users and 500 million saved in canceled subscriptions, Rocket Money members save up to $740 a year using the app's premium features. For me, the subscription tracker has been a game changer. I've canceled a few services I wasn't even using anymore, and I've saved so much money, and I've used their goals feature app. It's helped me automatically set aside money for the future without stressing things like vacation, stuff like that. Take control of your finances with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Don't let those unwanted subscriptions drain your wallet. Start saving money today. All right, we're back on Locked On UConn with your host Mark Zanetto and co-host Dan Meehan of Exit 68. So we did a little bit of comparison to last year's teams of where they're at for 13 games. Did mention about the center position. I think what's interesting is they're doing a little bit of offense defense down the stretch with the point guard. So they're bringing in guys like Jay Ross, Jay Stu to be more defensive stoppers against and be a bigger presence against maybe guards or wings versus keeping Hassan in or Aiden or those folks. And maybe Ahmad gets some of that run too. But it kind of helps them kind of create better matchups and then flipping that on offense and having Liam kind of run point essentially and facilitate offense when the bigger guys are in there. So even saw Aiden play a little 2-guard off ball against the last game against Butler. So had a nice, I think 6 points or 5 points or 6 points or 7 points in 6 minutes. So or 10 minutes. That was a good sign. But I will tell you that the center position is definitely different. It's not better. It's different. The stats are better. 100% the stats are better. But what we're not necessarily missing, the teams are challenging us more because you don't have, the great wall of Donovan Clingan up there to kind of essentially just be like, deter them. Like teams made business decisions sometimes, except for Illinois because they were stupid. But with the exception of them, most teams were like, they dribble in and they'd go, I can't shoot over him, so I'm going to dribble out. So he probably would have blocked like 10 shots a game if the same amount of people came at Donovan that are coming at Samson and Terrace and Youssef to an extent. He probably averages like 6, 7, 8 blocks a game. So it's crazy the contributions that Donovan had just by his mere presence.
Yeah, Donovan, I did another thread on Twitter the other day, just explaining just how great he was, his presence alone and what that did for the rest of the team. He was just an orb, a black hole in the middle. You only need to get blocked or have your shot deterred once by that guy to not want to go in there again. This team, and in contrast, you drive in on Samson or Terrace, maybe pick up a foul. That gives you confidence to go back and do it. So that's the kind of effect that, the difference there between centers from last year, this can have. But those guys have gotten better every game. I think you look at the way this first season breaks down, they played 13 games. The first, 3 of those first 6 or 7 are out in Maui. You can call those a one-off, but they found some things in those games. When they got back to the continental United States, they looked at film. They had a week off to practice in between Gonzaga. Dan is doing, you talk to some of the lineup changes and what they're doing late in games where this past game again in Butler, they pulled solo under 2 minutes to put in Jay Ross for one possession, one defensive possession, try to just get a stop in a close game that was 3, 4, 5 point difference, and it worked. Dan has done the same thing with the lineup changes in the first half, bringing Youssef in. If Samson or Terrace respectively picks up 1 or 2 fouls early, he's yanking them quick because he knows that they need their foul count late in the second half. The presence of having those guys on the court late in the game is more important than the first half is. So you're seeing more Youssef Singari minutes in the first half where you can almost not necessarily hide Youssef, because I think he's done a good job of just keeping the team even during his minutes. But if you can just have him out there and just have everything stay the same as it was when he gets on the court, that's a win, because you bring Samson and Terrace back at full strength, foul count wise, in the second half.
For sure. All right, let's talk about these net rankings right now. Maybe we do a little KenPom, but earlier this week we had our newest contributor to Locked on UConn, Tyler Remick, doing some analytics and statistical analysis for us. Our guy is a PhD in economics. Pretty smart guy. Very
our in-house Evan Mia.
That's right. Absolutely. And so what I would say is we went over these numbers, and if you haven't seen them already, so you got DePaul was 320 last year at the same point. They're 86 this year. Georgetown 205. They're 78. So those are good. The good things. Butler 70 was 68 last year. They're currently 71. This is the worst one. Last year, Seton Hall 67. They're dropped to 176. Gross. Xavier's exactly the same, 64. Providence, big dip. Last year, 58. Right now, they're 76. Villanova, another big dip. 41 last year at this point. They're 66. Then you have St. John's, about the same. Last year, they were 32. They're current 28, so a slight improvement. Marquette last year was 14th. This year, they're 9th, so an improvement for them there. Creighton, probably the worst dip of anybody, even though they're still kind of in the conversation. They were 11th last year in the net at this point last year, and they're 74th. And then, of course, you go UConn, 16th right now. Last year, at the end of the net, even though they won the national championship, they're ranked second, just so you know. That's how stupid the net rankings are. So they're what we need to use to kind of determine, seeding, because that's what the tournament committee does. So, but that in itself is the most ridiculous thing of all time, is that UConn goes 37-3 and runs the tournament like there's, the guys they're playing are standing still, and they're like, oh well, you're close, you're almost as good as Houston. But anyway, that's my one silly comment about the net.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, we use these metrics and kind of analytics as a reference point, and you got to kind of look through the tea leaves to get some more perspective with each team. But yeah, I mean, I think only a third of the teams that finish at the end of the season atop the KenPom rankings actually win the national championship. So take it for what it is. But yeah, I mean, you can look to last year to see where this year's Big East teams stack up, but it doesn't matter, right? You got to worry about this year. So the Big East, they have a down year last year. They only get 3 bids in the national tournament. I think they're a 4-bid league right now, maybe 5, maybe. So it's not too far off from where we were last year. I think UConn's in the class.
Do you know what I was going to say? And this is the perfect time to mention it because of how many bids you think there are. I think there's a new pressure in the Big East right now that only mid-major conferences feel when, like, take Drake, for example. Like at the end of the year when Drake or, even before Butler became, a Big East team, they were in a mid-major conference. Like, if you didn't win the Horizon League, you probably didn't get to the NCAA tournament, right? So my point is like, if you're not in the top 2 in the Big East right now, if you're not Marquette and UConn, it's like the rest of you have to, like, get it moving, because there's not a lot of opportunities. Because if we read those numbers again, those are all quad 2 and quad 1 games, and a quad 3 and a quad 4 game in these rankings. So that doesn't do much for your net. If we beat what's Seton Hall 176, if we beat quad 4 Seton Hall by 100 points, that would help. But if we beat them by 10, then that's gonna hurt our net ranking. And unfortunately, that's only something that 1 and 2 bid leagues have ever had to deal with. And now that the SEC and the Big 10 and the Big 12 are essentially these huge super conferences, and the ACC has dipped down even below the Big East, it's like, who do you like? There aren't going to be 4 and 5 bids from this league, nor are they going to get them in the ACC as well.
Yeah, and just to give some folks at home just a little perspective of how the net rankings work, this gets broken down by RPI percentage. This used to be a big metric that analysts and bracket makers at ESPN would use over the years. They did away with it, but the underlying data for how the net rankings are quantified is top 50 RPI. They do neutral games, wins above bubble teams, which is a Bart Torvik stat, and then broken down into 4 different quads. So as it stands, this is just going to give you a little perspective of the opportunities that UConn and the other teams in the Big East have going forward to score well in certain quadrants. So currently UConn stands at number 16 in the net. They are 7-0 in wins above bubble games. That's a BartTorvik.com stat for teams on the cusp of making the tournament. So UConn is 7-0 against those teams, which is great. They're 4-2 in quad 1 games. They're 1-1 in quad 2 games, 5-0 in quad 4 games, and haven't played any quad 3s. There are 3 teams currently in the Big East that are in the top 50 of the net standings, 7 in the top 75. To give you some perspective of how other top conferences compare to that, the SEC has 6 teams in the top 20 of the net.
Yep.
So you can talk about eating each other, and you're gonna just kind of keep each other even if everyone's just kind of eating each other night to night. The SEC is going to the top teams in the SEC is going to have more opportunities to score and build their resume for March in their conference than the Big East is. So if there's just less competition for UConn to play the rest of the way, they're going to have a tough time, getting on people's good graces come March. But if they, in their next 18 games, say they go, 14-4, that doesn't hurt them. I don't think the competition hurts them per se, because I think they left a really good taste in people's mouths the last 3, 4, 5 games, especially with some of those games against some better teams like Gonzaga.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I'm thinking more like adjacent, like the entire Big East. Like if you're St. John's right now, like even though your metrics are pretty good right now, you're 32, you're 28 in the net. I don't know what they are in the RPI. I think, or not the RPI, the KenPom. I think it's probably top 20.
Or top 20.
Right. So even though that's good, if St. John's, who is kind of a little all over the place, if they lose to Providence this year, if they lose to, God forbid they lose to Georgetown or somebody like that, and it's a bad quad 2 loss, that's not going to be looked at. That's the thing, is like, to give people context, to all of us who've been watching Big East basketball for 30 something years, we know these games are all going to be tough. Trust me, even Seton Hall on the road is going to be tough, but the metrics will not show that. Like, it just won't show. That's the one thing that analytics can't tell you, is like the feel of the gym, how the games are being played, the way the whistle's blown, like all of that stuff. So you can, to a certain extent, like they have like luck quadrants and stuff like that. I know KenPom does too, but that's the only thing that's difficult to quantify. Is the Big East is going to be a tough conference. They're always tough games. Like if you're trying to tell me right now that UConn, which is 16th in the net and is 11th in the country in the AP, who just played a Butler team on the road, is ranked 71st. There's not 70 better teams than Butler right now in the country. I'm sorry, there just isn't. But it's also the UConn factor. Do you see that Connecticut on the chest right now? And all you're thinking about is they won a national championship last year, the year before. And if we win them, that shows where we are as a program. It's a measuring stick. So I don't know if you'll ever be able to get that from analytics, but like we're getting everyone's best shot. Like that's the bottom line.
I'm not sure if this the column, if you go to NCAA.com's website and look at these net rankings, that column with wins above bubble teams, that I think that's a new kind of thing that they've factored in this year. That's going to be an important one later for the bracket makers when they're trying to whittle this down and figure out who the last 4 in are, or the last 8, whatever. They're going to look at that column to see if there's 4 to 8 teams that they're trying to figure out who is going to be the 4 that do get in. Mm-hmm. That's the first column they're going to look at to see how you stacked up against teams that were potentially lesser than you. If you've got a bad record in those games, I don't know how
many lose those games.
Yeah, I don't know how many of those that the Big East teams that are vying to get a final spot are going to even tally into that column, but that's going to be the one thing that Joe Lunardi's of the world are going to look at. And if you have a bad record in those games against lesser competition, good luck, especially in a year where we're hoping to get a 4th bid coming off a 3-bid league last year. Perform well in that category and you should be okay, but we'll see.
For sure. When we return, let's talk about Dan Hurley's leadership. These nicknames or titles he's been giving the players. We talked a little bit about it on Monday. I want to get Dan's perspective on it. We know that it's intentional, and we'll probably dive into maybe some nicknames that we think, like we did on Monday with Tyler, but also what are the best nicknames in UConn history? Talk about that after the break. The NFL playoffs are just around the corner, but there's still time to cash in on the regular season excitement with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can end the season on a high note with $250 in bonus bets when you make your first $5 bet and you win that bet. So FanDuel makes betting as exciting as possible. Personally, I love doing anytime touchdown scorers. It's not just about who will win the game. You have players that will hit the end zone or not, how many points a team will score. You can predict the score and so much more. Head to FanDuel.com and sign up today. That's FanDuel.com to score $250 in bonus bets with your first $5 wager. Make every play count with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So our old friends at Home Field. I'm wearing Home Field right now. Are you a diehard fan like me? I always wanted to represent the Huskies, and there's no better way to do that with Home Field apparel. They've got the most comfortable, vintage-inspired UConn gear that helps you show off your school pride and style, whether you're cheering in the stands or just laying around. Home Field has you covered. Home Field's premium apparel not only looks great, but it feels amazing too. They've taken the time to research and crafted perfect designs that represent UConn's rich history, so you can wear your pride with every stitch, from sweatshirts to tees. They have something for every Husky fan. I'm wearing this vintage old school Connecticut with the old school Husky logo. Here's the best part right now is you can get 15% off your first order when you use the promo code UConn24 at checkout. Just head to homefieldapparel.com, use that code UConn24, and grab your gear. We're back on Locked On UConn with Dan Meehan and of Exit 68. I'm your host, Mark Zanetto. Last thing we're going to talk about is Dan kind of dropped a couple of these interesting titles. The last few times, Terrace Reed is the Kodiak Bear, General Hassan Diarra. Two things. One, I know this is intentional, but what does it say about Dan when he does this? Like, for me, what I told Tyler on Monday is it always made me feel good, no matter what sport I played, when a coach would kind of like tag you as something. And even if it's done privately and then he does it in the media, it kind of puts it out there in the universe. And I know that that's something that Dan's big on, intentionality. So I just think this shows incredible leadership for, maybe Terrace has had some, thoughts about how maybe he needs to be better or whatever. I'm just speculating there, but I think Dan's trying to get every ounce of potential out of this team. And the way Haas is playing, he is playing like a general. Like, it's cool. Like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, and then we'll get into like our favorite nicknames and stuff.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion because I absolutely think it's intentional. I think he's having some fun with it. I've never seen a coach so tapped into the culture of a team. Like Dan Hurley, he made a comment this past week, like people on Twitter, on podcasts saying certain things. Like, he hears this stuff. He's using the nicknames people are saying, and he's putting some weight behind it. So, yeah, calls Terrace Reed. He says he wants him to be a Kodiak Bear, and he's trying to unlock something in these guys to try to see if they can peak and get them to the next level. If he can put a moniker to their on-court personality and see if he can kind of tap into something to get some better results, I'm all for it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. You mentioned the being tapped into podcasts. I don't. He wasn't talking about us per se, about podcasts say a lot of stupid but what I will say is that there was one thumbnail where he could have saw that and been like, whatever, dude. Like, because we did talk about the opener curse, is that a real thing? And I did put in the sub headline, they're 1-5 under Dan Hurley, but I did not go as far as to say I thought that was going to continue. So if you're listening to this, Dan, we love you. We knew that wasn't going to continue, and thank God it didn't. But I will say, I think I like the fact that he's tapped in like that, because I think sometimes people are the shut up and dribble crowd, the people who are like, just, pay attention, tunnel vision. It kind of shows a tone deafness when you do that, because if your fan base for the most part is really locked in with you, like, how many Bear videos did you see Terrace Reed get? How many Top Gun General videos? I'm sure there's gonna be more in the next coming weeks. I'm sure I'm gonna do one because I haven't got a chance to do one yet. Like, I'd love to see Haas as the as the general in Gladiator, the first one. like that kind of stuff. Like, so I just know that that's what he's doing it for. It's his. I'm going to say something that may be controversial. You know how he doesn't want players to be on TikTok? This is his version of it. It's like, I'm going to put this out there so that everyone does it for you. And then you can just retweet it, but you don't have to spend your time doing it. He's like, let the knuckleheads out in the fan base do it and get us jazzed up. You don't put that stuff out there. Let them do it.
I've never seen a coach so just into the crowd. He riles up the crowd. He wants them loud. Dan Hurley famously now, some people have complained the Gamble slate of games and the competition is much better at Gamble than it is at XL Center. That is very intentional, I can promise you, because that place is rocking. It is a different type of loud inside Gamble Pavilion. The experiential stuff that they do during the games, it's just in way more of an environment. It's that Fall Gallon type stuff, and he wants to create that on campus, and it's building. But all right, do you want to get through some of these?
I want to hear your favorite, like your nicknames right now. If you had to tag a title for, give me one, give me two, whatever, and then maybe your favorite nickname of anybody all time at UConn.
All right, I'm going to run through some of the current UConn guys. Alex Caravan, that's Captain America. That's old reliable. Just brings it every night. Don't have to worry about that guy. Set it and forget it. Liam McNeely. I saw one of the highlights that UConn did on UConn Plus, encapsulating the first 10 games. Liam McNeely, one of the announcers, called him Mighty Mac. Love that.
That's cool.
McNasty and Liam Legend, an ode to another legendary white dude in the Northeast.
Might have heard of him. Might have heard of that guy.
Yeah, I like Liam Legend. Plays a similar game, might I add. Solo ball, Sir Solomon. Terrace Reed. I really like these ones. Terrace has got a lot to work with here. Tower of Terrace, an ode to the Tower of Terror. T-Rex, one half of the aggregate. And I'm going to play off of Dan Hurley's Kodiak Bear, and I'm just going to call Terrace the Revenant. Samson.
I love that.
We're going to give an ode to Sammy Sosa. Slammin' Sammy. Samson dunks everything. Slammin' Sammy. And another one, he is the second half of the aggregate. Hassan Diarra. And Jaden Ross, I'm going Jay Smooth. He plays a smooth brand of basketball.
I love that. I also have a smooth in that one for him. And then the only thing I would add to any of those is I'm trying to find my notes from Monday. Like the only one I liked, even not necessarily better, but I think I called Samson the Tower of Togo because of where he's from. But honestly, those are great. I like the Liam one. I think I did something about Liam being the assassin, or just that song Cold as Ice. I just feel like that's another one. Yep. But that's all I got. What's your favorite nickname of all time? I know what mine is.
There's a lot of them. You can go, all right, going back to the old school. Cliff Robinson, Uncle Cliffy. Rip Hamilton, probably the greatest. We got Ray Allen. Hashim Thabit was Hosh. Kling Kong. Action Jackson.
Yep.
K Free, Kevin Freeman. Shout out the 99 team. Cardiac Kemba, all time. I think my favorite one of all time. It was just so fitting from the day he stepped on campus and it stuck with him. He had just an unabashed one single season at UConn. Joey California.
That's cool. Yeah, I like that one. Joey Cal. I like that. I just love the way that it flows in Madison Square Garden. I just do. That's just a seminal team, and a team that's to this day probably could have been an undefeated team, but just had the most talent probably that we've ever had. So absolutely. Well, listen, man, hope you're enjoying your holidays. We'll definitely get back on the grind next week, but go have yourself a nice weekend. And this has been another episode of Locked On UConn for your host, Mark Zanetto. Hi, that's Dan Meehan, Exit 68. Telling you guys, stay locked in. Be ready to come back with a vengeance. The foot stays on gas. We didn't take off. You had episodes all week. So just so you know, we'll be back. Go Huskies.